Captain Sarah Chen stood at the viewport of the Eclipse, watching the Concordat delegation's shuttle approach. Their sleek vessel, all gleaming alloys and pulsing quantum drives, looked comically out of place next to her ship's rust-colored hull. The Eclipse wasn't pretty. A hollowed-out asteroid 3 kilometers long, retrofitted with enough engines to qualify as a mobile station rather than a proper warship, at least by Concordat standards. "They're requesting docking clearance, Captain," Lieutenant Park announced from his station. The young officer was trying to hide his nervousness, but his fingers drummed an irregular beat on his mechanical keyboard, another piece of primitive technology that earned strange looks from their galactic visitors. "Granted," Sarah said, straightening her jacket. "And make sure all stations are running their diagnostics. Let them see exactly who we are." The Eclipse's bridge was a study in contradictions. Holographic displays floated next to analog gauges. Quantum processors shared space with mechanical computers. Physical switches and levers lined the walls alongside neural interfaces. The Concordat called it inefficient. Sarah called it redundancy. The delegation arrived with the expected pomp. 5 beings in ornate environmental suits, their movements precise and measured. Ambassador Tilara, a tall, crystalline entity, led the group. Her translator rendered her chemical signals into crisp, slightly condescending English. "Captain Chen, your hospitality honors us, though we find your accommodations somewhat primitive by Concordat standards." Sarah smiled. She'd been expecting this. "Ambassador, would you like a tour? I believe you'll find our primitiveness has its advantages." The next 2 hours were an exercise in patience. The delegation's scanning devices struggled to make sense of the Eclipse's hybrid systems. They couldn't comprehend why humans would use mechanical backup controls when neural interfaces were available, or why they'd choose tungsten armor plating over energy shields. "Your species appears to lack focus," Tilara observed, her crystalline form refracting light in patterns that suggested confusion. "You cling to obsolete technologies while simultaneously developing advanced ones. This scattershot approach is inefficient." Sarah led them to the main engineering section, where the Eclipse's heart beat with a rhythm that seemed to confuse the visitors even more. "With respect, Ambassador, we prefer to think of it as tactical flexibility. Each technology has its strengths and weaknesses. Why limit ourselves? Because progress requires leaving the primitive behind," Tilara stated, as if reciting a fundamental law of physics. "Your species shows promise, but you are at least a century away from being considered for Concordat membership. Your refusal to fully embrace advanced technology." A klaxon cut through the air, its harsh mechanical tone drawing winces from the delegation. Lieutenant Park's voice crackled over the intercom. Not the neural net, but old-fashioned speakers. "Captain to the bridge. Multiple contacts at the system's edge." Sarah was moving before the message finished. The delegation followed, their previous composure forgotten in the sudden shift. On the bridge, the Eclipse's hybrid sensor suite painted a concerning picture. Dark objects, moving fast, their signatures unlike anything in Concordat records. "Our quantum sensors can detect nothing unusual," Tilara announced, consulting her advanced systems. "Perhaps your primitive equipment is malfunctioning." Sarah ignored the jab, focusing on the data streaming across her displays. The objects were invisible to quantum scanning but showed up clear as day on old-fashioned radar and lidar. "Lieutenant Park, signal the fleet. Full combat readiness, but maintain emissions control. Something's out there, and I don't think they're friendly." "Captain." Tilara's translator struggled to convey her mix of concern and dismissal. "The Concordat has maintained peace in this sector for millennia. Our advanced defense networks would have detected any threat. Your primitive sensors are clearly picking up massive energy spike," Park shouted. "Whatever they are, they're powering weapons." Sarah's hand slammed down on the general quarters alarm, a physical button that sent mechanical bells ringing throughout the ship. "Ambassador, I suggest you contact your vessel. Now. Lieutenant, get me fleet command. If I'm right, we're about to have a very bad day." The objects accelerated, their signatures resolving into ships unlike anything humanity or the Concordat had encountered. As Sarah watched them approach, a cold certainty settled in her gut. The Earth Defense Force's primitive fleet might be humanity's only chance against what was coming. The Concordat delegation huddled around their quantum communicator, trying to raise their ship. Nothing but static answered. Their advanced systems, for all their sophistication, had been rendered useless by whatever was approaching. But throughout the eclipse, mechanical systems hummed, radar pinged, and radio waves carried clear communication between ships of the human fleet. "Captain." Tulara's translator couldn't quite capture the tremor in her chemical emissions. "What are your orders?" Sarah Chen allowed herself a grim smile. Time to show the galaxy what primitive really meant. Signal the fleet. Battle stations. Let's introduce ourselves to our uninvited guests. The swarm struck with devastating precision. Sarah watched in horror as the Concordat's mighty Seventh Fleet vanished from quantum channels, ship after ship going dark. Through the eclipse's viewport, she could see the reality their sensors had detected: crystalline vessels that seemed to absorb light itself, their surfaces crawling with mechanical parasites. "All quantum communications are dead," Lieutenant Park reported, his hand steady on his archic controls despite the chaos unfolding around them. "But our radio network is holding. We're getting reports from the entire human fleet. The swarm's jamming isn't affecting our old tech systems." Sarah nodded, her mind racing through implications. Broadcast to all Earth ships. Maintain radio silence except for emergency channels. Switch to landline communications where possible. She turned to Ambassador Tulara, who stood frozen at her crystalline command console. "Ambassador, we need to contact your people. Our systems are still working." Tulara's translator struggled to keep up with her rapid chemical signals. "Impossible. Your primitive technology cannot." "Look." Sarah pointed to the main display, where radar signatures showed the brutal efficiency of the attack. The swarm ships weren't just destroying the Concordat vessels, they were somehow absorbing them, growing larger with each victory. "They're harvesting your technology. Every ship they take makes them stronger." The eclipse shuddered as distant explosions rippled through space. On the emergency channels, desperate reports flooded in from the outer colonies. The swarm was systematically targeting the most advanced installations first, consuming quantum computers, neural networks, and energy shield generators. "Message from Colony 7. Park's voice cracked. They're gone, Captain." The swarm didn't just destroy them. They stripped every piece of advanced tech before. He couldn't finish the sentence. Sarah felt the weight of command settling heavily on her shoulders. The Concordat's mighty civilization, built on thousands of years of technological advancement, was being turned against itself. But humanity's primitive fleet, with its hybrid of old and new tech, remained largely invisible to the swarm's scanning systems. "Lieutenant, get me all sensor data from the Colony 7 attack." "Ambassador, I need everything you have on the Concordat's outlying installations." Sarah moved to the central tactical table, its surface a mix of holographic projections and physical markers. "We need to understand their pattern before more worlds fall." Hours passed in a blur of data analysis. The swarm's strategy became clear. They weren't just mindless destroyers. They were systematically upgrading themselves with each attack, becoming more advanced, more adaptable. But they completely ignored technology they deemed too primitive to be useful. A bitter laugh escaped Sarah's lips. "They're making the same mistake you did, Ambassador, dismissing anything that doesn't fit their definition of advanced." Hilara's crystalline form shimmered with what might have been embarrassment. Perhaps we were hasty in our judgment. But what can we do? Our most sophisticated weapons are useless. Then we use unsophisticated ones. Sarah pulled up the specifications for the human fleet. The Eclipse wasn't built to be pretty. It was built to survive. Those armor plates you mocked, they're filled with lead bismuth alloy, completely invisible to quantum scanning. Our mechanical systems can't be hacked. And our weapons, She allowed herself a grim smile. Well, let's just say sometimes the old ways work best. The bridge crew worked through the night, coordinating with other human ships and the remaining Concordat forces. They tracked the swarm's movement, noting how the enemy ships grew more sophisticated with each victory. But their very evolution was becoming their weakness. They were losing the ability to detect simpler threats. "Captain!" Park's shout cut through the tension. "New contacts. The swarm just hit the Proxima research station. But something's different. They're not moving on. They're mining the debris." Sarah rushed to his station, studying the radar returns. The swarm ships were lingering over the destruction, systematically stripping every piece of quantum technology from the wreckage. They're not just upgrading randomly. They're building toward something specific. Tilara moved closer, her translator working overtime to keep up with her agitated chemical emissions. The research station, it contained experimental quantum fold technology. If the swarm assimilates that, they could strike anywhere, instantly. Sarah finished the thought. The implications were staggering. The swarm wasn't just destroying civilization. It was stealing its best weapons, preparing for something even worse. She keyed the ship-wide comm, using the old-fashioned speakers that still worked when everything else failed. "All hands, this is the captain. What we feared has happened. The swarm is loose in our galaxy. They think they've got us beaten because they've taken out the advanced fleets. But they've forgotten something important." Sarah looked around at her crew. Humans manning their hybrid stations, using technology both old and new, refusing to be bound by anyone else's definitions of progress. They'd forgotten that sometimes the best way forward is to remember where you came from. Stand to your stations. The real fight is just beginning. The Concordat High Command Chamber was a marvel of advanced architecture, its quantum crystalline walls shifting and flowing like liquid starlight. Sarah Chen felt distinctly out of place in her primitive Earth Force uniform, standing before the assembled Admiralty with her radical proposal. "Absolutely not." Admiral Zexthor's voice resonated through neural channels. "We will not stake the survival of civilization on obsolete technology and desperate gambles." Sarah held her ground. "With respect, Admiral, your advanced technology is exactly what the swarm wants. Every quantum-based weapon you launch, every energy shield you raise, just makes them stronger. But our hybrid approach has proven marginally effective in small engagements," another admiral cut in. "But this is not a time for small victories. The swarm approaches our core worlds. We need decisive action, which is exactly what I'm proposing." Sarah activated her presentation. Old-fashioned holographic projectors rather than neural feeds. The Eclipse and ships like her can get close to the swarm without being detected. Our primitive technology acts like a cloak. They literally cannot see us coming. The chamber erupted in dismissive chatter, but a new voice cut through the chaos. "She's right." All eyes turned to the speaker, a tall, crystalline officer whose form was marred by irregular patterns, signs of deep trauma. Sarah recognized him immediately. Krithak, the tactical officer who'd lost his entire family when Colony 7 fell. "I was there," Krithak continued, his translator rendering his chemical signals into harsh, emotion-laden words. "I watched our most advanced ships, our best defenses, fail in seconds. But the human vessels, they survived. They even managed to evacuate some of our people, using methods we dismissed as obsolete." Sarah felt a surge of hope. Finally, someone who understood. Krithak moved to stand beside her, his crystalline form reflecting the chamber's shifting lights. "The swarm grows stronger with every piece of advanced technology it absorbs," he said. "But it ignores what it considers primitive. That's not just in weakness. It's an opportunity." Sarah nodded, advancing her presentation. "We've developed a plan. A way to use our primitive technology as a Trojan horse. The Eclipse and other human ships can carry modified quantum payloads, weapons the swarm won't detect until it's too late. And what makes you think you can succeed where our best ships have failed? Admiral Zexthor demanded. Krithak answered before Sarah could. Because they think differently. They don't follow our doctrine of linear technological progress. They adapt, combine old and new in ways we never considered, ways the swarm won't expect. The chamber fell silent as Krithak shared sensor logs from Colony 7. The footage was devastating. Advanced ships falling like dominoes, their quantum defenses useless. But in the background, human vessels darted through the chaos, their hybrid systems confounding the swarm's targeting algorithms. I volunteered to join Captain Chen's mission, Krithak announced. My tactical knowledge, combined with their unconventional approach, could give us the edge we need. Sarah hadn't expected this, but she seized the opportunity. Think about it, admirals. The swarm expects you to respond with your most advanced technology. They're counting on it. But what if we gave them something else? Something they've dismissed as harmless. Hours of debate followed. Sarah and Krithak presented evidence, answered questions, fought against generations of ingrained beliefs about technological progress. Finally, Admiral Zexthor spoke. Your proposal is irregular, dangerous, and goes against everything we believe about warfare. He paused, his crystalline form clouding with emotion. But we are out of options. You have one chance, Captain Chen. One chance to prove that your primitive methods can save us all. After the chamber cleared, Krithak approached Sarah privately. They don't understand yet, he said softly. How much we'll have to sacrifice. What it will cost to win this war. Sarah met his gaze. No, but they will. The real question is, are you ready for what comes next? This isn't just about saving the Concordat anymore. It's about changing how an entire civilization thinks about progress. Krithak's form shimmed with what might have been a laugh. Captain, I watched everything I believed in fail when Colony 7 fell. Perhaps it's time we all learn to think differently. As they walked to the Eclipse's docking bay, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were starting something bigger than either of them realized. The Concordat had dismissed humanity as primitive, but that very primitiveness might be the key to survival. Now they just had to prove it. The first real test of Sarah's strategy came at the Battle of Proxima Ridge. The Eclipse hung in the shadow of a massive debris field, its hybrid systems running silent. Beside it, Krithak's ship, the Crystalline Vengeance, had been retrofitted with human technology, much to his crew's initial horror. Target approaching, Lieutenant Park whispered, though there was no need for silence in space. Old habits died hard. 3 swarm vessels, all heavy class. They're bigger than before. Sarah studied the radar returns. The swarm ships had grown grotesquely, their crystalline structures now incorporating stolen quantum technology from dozens of conquered vessels. They were more advanced than ever, and that was exactly what she was counting on. Status of the Windows system, she asked, drawing confused looks from the Concordat observers on her bridge. Running Windows 95, Captain. As unstable as ever. Park grinned. The ancient operating system had been loaded into a segregated computer system, deliberately isolated from the ship's main controls. What the Concordat saw as primitive technology, Sarah saw as the perfect trap. Krithak, are you in position? The crystalline officer's voice crackled over the radio. No, quantum comms here. Ready, Captain. Though I still don't understand how this ancient system will help. You will. All ships, execute Operation Blue Screen. The Eclipse's engines flared to life, pushing it out of hiding. Its primitive kinetic weapons, simple tungsten rods accelerated to relativistic speeds, launched toward the nearest swarm vessel. The enemy's quantum shields, designed to stop energy weapons, might as well have been tissue paper. But the real surprise came when the swarm tried to counterattack. Their viral assault, designed to infiltrate and corrupt advanced computer systems, hit the Windows 95 partition like a wave hitting a beach, and crashed spectacularly. They're trying to process the blue screen of death. Park shouted, genuine glee in his voice. Their whole network is getting tangled in error messages. Sarah allowed herself a tight smile. The swarm's hyper-advanced systems, built to understand and assimilate cutting-edge technology, were completely stymied by the archaic, notoriously unstable operating system. They couldn't corrupt what they couldn't comprehend. All ships pressed the advantage. Kinetic weapons free. The battle that followed was unlike anything in Concordat military history. Human vessels darted between the confused swarm ships, their hybrid weapons wreaking havoc. Krithak's crystalline vengeance, now armed with retrofitted railguns alongside its quantum arsenal, proved devastatingly effective. "This is impossible," one of the Concordat observers muttered, watching as another swarm vessel succumbed to primitive weapons. "They're using technology that's centuries old." "Sometimes the old ways work best," Sarah replied, ordering another salvo. "The swarm expects us to fight like you do, always seeking the most advanced solution. But humanity learned long ago that newer isn't always better." The battle reached its climax when the largest swarm vessel launched a desperate assault on the Eclipse. Its viral attack was massive, designed to overwhelm any defense. It hit the Windows partition and encountered something even more chaotic than itself, a system so fundamentally unpredictable that it defied artificial intelligence. "Multiple system crashes detected," Park reported calmly. "Windows is, well, being Windows. The swarm's entire command network is trying to process our error messages. They're locked in a feedback loop." Krithak's voice crackled over the radio. "Captain, the swarm ships, they're starting to malfunction. Whatever your primitive system did, it's spreading through their network." Sarah watched as the mighty swarm vessels began to drift, their sophisticated systems paralyzed by something as simple as an old operating system's quirks. It was a victory, yes, but more importantly, it was proof of concept. "Send word to Concordat High Command," she ordered. "Tell them we found a weakness, and tell them to dig out every piece of old technology they've got in storage. We're going to need it all." Hours later, after the debris had been cleared and the victory recorded, Krithak visited the Eclipse. He stood in the computer room, staring at the ancient monitor still displaying its blue screen of death. "I've spent my life believing that progress meant constantly advancing, always seeking the next breakthrough," he said quietly. "But this is something else entirely." Sarah nodded. "The swarm thinks like the Concordat, always forward, always more advanced. They've forgotten that sometimes the best way to solve a problem is to think backwards, to use what worked before. And now we show them what else humanity kept in its toolbox. The swarm wanted a technological war. Let's give them one they'll never forget. Fought with every piece of tech humanity ever created, from the newest quantum computer to the oldest mechanical calculator." As if to emphasize her point, the Windows system chose that moment to crash again, filling the screen with its familiar blue error message. Krithak's translator couldn't quite capture his chemical equivalent of laughter, but Sarah got the idea. Sometimes the best weapon was the one your enemy thought too primitive to fear. The success at Proxima Ridge sparked a revolution within the Concordat fleet, but not the kind anyone expected. Sarah stood in the Eclipse's main briefing room, watching as young Concordat officers argued with their seniors over tactical displays. The human methods work. Junior Officer Zelix's crystalline form pulsed with frustrated light. "We've seen it ourselves. Why do we keep waiting for software updates when we could be installing manual overrides?" Fleet Commander Vaxthor, his ancient form, a deep purple with anger, vibrated in response. "Because proper protocol demands." The ship-wide alert cut him off mid-sentence. "All hands, battle stations, incoming swarm vessels." Sarah was moving before the announcement finished. "Status report. 3 swarm battle groups," Lieutenant Park called out. "They're targeting the Concordat's 15th fleet. The fleet's quantum networks they're locked in a software update cycle. They can't respond." The view screens showed the disaster unfolding. The 15th Fleet, one of the Concordat's most advanced battle groups, hung helpless in space as their systems struggled to integrate the latest tactical updates. The swarm closed in for what should have been an easy kill. Should have been. Captain. It was Zelix, the young officer who'd been arguing for human methods. My ship, the Stellar Dawn. We installed manual overrides last week. Against regulations. But now you can fight. Sarah finished. Get your ship moving. Show them what you've learned. What followed was a testament to the changing tide of war. The Stellar Dawn, running on hybrid systems inspired by human designs, broke formation. Other ships, mostly crewed by younger officers who'd secretly modified their vessels, followed suit. They engaged the swarm using tactics that would have horrified the Concordat Admiralty just weeks ago. Look at them go, Krithak murmured, watching from his station on the Eclipse. They're fighting like humans now. Unpredictable. Adaptive. The modified ships danced through space, their movements free from the rigid patterns the swarm had learned to predict. They fired salvos of both quantum torpedoes and simple kinetic rounds, overwhelming enemy defenses designed to counter one or the other, but not both. But the real shock came from the Stellar Dawn itself. When a swarm viral attack hit its networks, Zelix did the unthinkable. He ordered a complete systems shutdown, switching to the manual controls his crew had practiced in secret. The swarm's attack found nothing to corrupt, while the ship continued to fight. That's not possible. Commander Vaxthor protested, watching the battle unfold. They're violating every principle of modern combat. No, Sarah corrected him. They're evolving, just like we did. The battle turned decisively when more ships from the 15th Fleet finally broke free of their update cycle. But instead of rejoining the fight with their usual tactics, many of their junior officers took inspiration from what they were seeing. Manual overrides were engaged. Predictable attack patterns were abandoned. The rigid hierarchy of Concordat combat doctrine began to crack. Hours later, after the swarm had been driven back, Sarah found herself mediating a heated debate in the Eclipse's briefing room. The generational divide in the Concordat fleet had become impossible to ignore. We cannot simply abandon millennia of tactical doctrine, Vaxthor insisted. We're not abandoning it, Zelix countered. We're adding to it. The humans never gave up their advanced technology. They just refused to be limited by it. Why can't we do the same? Sarah let them argue, watching as more young officers spoke up, sharing stories of secret modifications and training sessions. The revolution wasn't just about technology anymore. It was about thinking differently, about questioning assumptions that had gone unchallenged for too long. Perhaps, Krithak suggested quietly, this is what we needed. Not just new weapons, but new ways of thinking. The swarm adapts by stealing technology. We need to adapt by changing our minds. The debate raged on, but Sarah could see the shift happening. Every junior officer who spoke up, every success story shared, every tradition questioned. It was all part of something bigger than tactics and technology. The Concordat was learning what humanity had known for centuries. True advancement wasn't about abandoning the old for the new, but about finding ways to use everything at your disposal. As she watched the next generation of Concordat officers embrace this hybrid approach, Sarah couldn't help but smile. The primitive human fleet hadn't just changed how the Concordat fought. It had changed how they thought. And in a war against an enemy that turned advanced technology against itself, that might make all the difference. The revolution in the ranks was just beginning, and with it, perhaps, a revolution in how an entire civilization viewed progress itself. The combined fleet that assembled for the counterattack barely resembled its former self. Sarah watched from the Eclipse's bridge as ships moved into formation. Concordat vessels now sporting makeshift armor plating, human ships with crystalline sensor arrays grafted onto their hulls, and hybrid vessels that defied traditional classification entirely. Fleet check-in complete, Lieutenant Park reported. 217 ships, Captain. Largest combined operation we've attempted. Krithak's voice crackled over the radio from his ship, the Crystalline Vengeance. The swarm won't expect this. They've never faced a unified force using both advanced and alternative technologies. Sarah smiled at his diplomatic word choice. Primitive had become somewhat of a taboo term in the fleet. All ships, final systems check. Remember your training. Use everything at your disposal, old and new. That's our strength. The fleet moved through space like a predator awakening, not the precise, geometric formations the Concordat once favored, but something more organic, more unpredictable. Young Concordat officers who'd trained under Sarah had spread her doctrine throughout the fleet. Never be predictable, never rely on a single system, and never forget that sometimes the oldest solution was the best one. Swarm contacts. Park's voice cut through the tension. 5 carrier groups moving to intercept. They're massive, Captain. Bigger than anything we've encountered. The tactical display showed the truth of his words. The swarm had evolved, their ships now grotesque amalgamations of stolen technology. But something was different about their movement patterns. They're adapting to our hybrid tactics, Krithak observed, moving more erratically, trying to mirror our unpredictability. Sarah nodded. Then we show them something new. All ships, execute Operation Thunderbolt. The fleet split into 3 groups, each moving in patterns that looked chaotic, but had been carefully choreographed. Human ships launched salvos of dumb missiles carrying quantum payloads, too primitive for the swarm to detect until the advanced warheads detonated. Concordat vessels, their crystalline hulls now reinforced with simple armor plating, absorbed hits that would have shattered their pure quantum shields. The battle quickly devolved into the kind of chaos Sarah had learned to embrace. Ships switched between advanced and primitive systems on the fly, confounding swarm attempts to predict and counter their attacks. When viral attacks struck, crews threw switches to isolate critical systems, falling back on mechanical backups that couldn't be hacked. They're targeting our command and control, Park shouted as another quantum network went dark. Switch to backup frequencies, Sarah ordered. Time for the old CB radio network. Across the fleet, crews pulled out radio equipment that would have been considered ancient by Concordat standards. The encrypted quantum channels fell silent, replaced by crackling voices using code phrases that would have made World War II veterans smile. The tide turned when the swarm launched their biggest assault yet, a massive viral attack aimed at the fleet's quantum-linked weapons. But Sarah had been waiting for this. All ships, initiate Protocol Winchester. Throughout the fleet, crews yanked power cables, physically disconnecting their advanced systems. The swarm's attack found nothing to corrupt, while railguns and coil cannons, weapons powered by simple electromagnetic principles, continued to fire. But victory came at a terrible cost. The Crystalline Vengeance, Krithak's ship, took heavy damage protecting a group of human vessels from a swarm assault. Sarah watched in horror as his ship's systems began to fail. Krithak, get your crew to the escape pods. No time. His voice was calm over the radio. But I can still do one last thing. Captain. Sarah, remember what we learned. Primitives, together, strong. The Crystalline Vengeance turned toward the nearest swarm carrier, its engines overloading. The explosion took out not just the carrier but 3 other swarm vessels, creating a gap in their formation that the fleet quickly exploited. Hours later, when the last swarm ship had been destroyed or driven off, Sarah stood in the Eclipse's memorial hall. Krithak's name would be added to the wall, along with all the others lost in the war. But his sacrifice had proven something vital. That unity wasn't about technological advancement, but about using everything at your disposal to protect what mattered. Captain. Lieutenant Park's voice was soft. The fleet's requesting instructions. Where do we go from here? Sarah touched Krithak's name on the wall one last time. We go forward. But we take the lessons of the past with us. All of them. That's what Krithak died to teach us. The combined fleet regrouped, battered but unbroken. They'd won more than just a battle. They'd proven that true strength came not from choosing between advanced and primitive technology, but from learning to use both in harmony. As Sarah looked out at the fleet, now truly unified in both technology and purpose, she knew that Krithak's last words would become their battle cry. Primitives, together, strong. It wasn't just a slogan. It was a philosophy that might just save the galaxy. Deep in swarm territory, the combined fleet made its most horrifying discovery. The Eclipse's hybrid sensors painted a picture that left even veteran crew members speechless. The swarm's central hub was a technological nightmare, a massive structure built from the amalgamated technology of countless civilizations it had destroyed. "My God," Lieutenant Park whispered, his hands hovering over his ancient keyboard. Those are pieces of ships, entire civilizations just absorbed." Sarah studied the readings with growing dread. The hub was a grotesque monument to the swarm's philosophy, endless advancement through consumption. Quantum processors meshed with crystalline matrices, neural networks intertwined with artificial intelligences from a dozen dead species. It was evolution gone mad, progress without purpose. "The structure's energy signature is off the charts," reported Zelix from the Stellar Dawn. The young Concordat officer's voice carried the weight of revelation. "It's not just storing the technology it steals. It's learning from it, evolving." Sarah watched the tactical display, where the hub's surface seemed to writhe with constant change. The swarm hadn't just built a base, they created a technological cancer, consuming and growing without end. This was the logical conclusion of the Concordat's philosophy of linear progress, taken to its most horrifying extreme. "All ships, maintain emissions control," she ordered. "We do this exactly as planned. One shot at their heart, that's all we need." The fleet moved into position, using every trick they'd learned. Human ships ran silent, their primitive systems invisible to the hub's advanced scanning. Modified Concordat vessels used hybrid shields that flickered between quantum and traditional energy matrices, confusing enemy targeting. But the hub had defenses they'd never encountered. Waves of energy rolled out, trying to assimilate their technology. Ships that relied too heavily on advanced systems found their computers turning against them, their quantum processors seduced by the hub's overwhelming digital presence. Multiple ships reporting system failures, Park called out. "The hub it's trying to absorb them remotely." "Switch to analog." Sarah's order rang through the fleet. "Fall back on mechanical systems. Show them what primitive really means." Across the battlefield, crews threw switches and pulled circuit breakers, disconnecting their advanced technology. Ships that had once been the pride of the Concordat now ran on backup systems that would have been considered obsolete centuries ago. But they kept fighting. The Eclipse led the charge, its hybrid nature now its greatest strength. Sarah had designed her ship not just to combine old and new technology, but to survive the loss of either. As the hub's assimilation waves washed over them, the crew smoothly transitioned between systems, never presenting the same profile twice. "We're getting close," Park reported. "But the hub's defenses are unlike anything we've seen. It's using every piece of technology it's ever stolen." Sarah watched as the hub deployed weapons from 1,000 different civilizations, each more advanced than the last. But with each attack, a pattern emerged. The swarm had forgotten something crucial in their endless pursuit of advancement. They don't know how to step backward, she realized. They can only move forward, only absorb what they consider advanced. And that's their weakness. The Eclipse's next attack proved her theory. Simple kinetic weapons, rocks accelerated to relativistic speeds, slipped through defenses designed to stop quantum torpedoes. Radio-guided missiles confused guidance systems built to detect quantum entanglement. And when the hub tried to hack their computers, it found itself trying to assimilate operating systems so old they might as well have been written in stone. All ships push forward. Show them what real evolution looks like. The battle that followed broke every rule of modern combat. Ships switched randomly between advanced and primitive technology, never presenting the same profile twice. The hub's defenses, designed to counter logical progression, couldn't adapt to attacks that seemed to move backward through technological history. In the end, it was the simplest weapon that proved most effective. As the hub struggled to assimilate their quantum systems, mechanical timing devices, literal clockwork mechanisms, detonated charges planted by boarding parties. The explosion wasn't particularly advanced, but it didn't need to be. Sometimes the old ways worked best. As the hub began to break apart, its structure collapsing from within, Sarah realized they'd done more than just win a battle. They'd proven that true progress wasn't a linear path forward, but the wisdom to know when to step back. "All ships, report status," she called out, watching as the hub's remains scattered across space. Each piece of stolen technology now just so much debris, proof that advancement without understanding was meaningless. The responses came back, some over quantum channels, others through crackling radio, and a few through signal lamps flashing in sequence. The fleet had survived, not because they were the most advanced, but because they'd remembered how to be flexible. As the dust settled, Sarah looked at her bridge crew, humans, and Concordat working side by side, using whatever tools best suited the moment. They taught the galaxy a lesson it wouldn't soon forget. True evolution meant keeping what worked, not just chasing what was new. The war wasn't over, but its outcome was no longer in doubt. The swarm had sought to consume all of technology's future. They'd forgotten that sometimes the past had teeth of its own. 5 years after the destruction of the swarm hub, Sarah Chen stood in the Eclipse's main hangar, now transformed into a museum space. Young beings from across the galaxy, humans, crystalline Concordat, and dozens of other species, gathered around exhibits showcasing both ancient and advanced technology working in harmony. "And this," she gestured to a glass case containing an old mechanical keyboard next to a quantum interface, "is what we call technological symbiosis. Not better, not worse, just different tools for different jobs." A young Concordat student raised their crystalline appendage. "Admiral Chen, is it true that before the war, the Concordat considered Earth's technology primitive?" Sarah smiled, remembering those early days. They did. And by their standards, they weren't wrong. But they were asking the wrong question. It wasn't about what was primitive or advanced. It was about what worked. She led the group through the ship's corridors, past displays showing the evolution of the combined fleet. Concordat ships retrofitted with manual controls, human vessels incorporating crystalline technology, and new designs that married the best of both worlds. "The swarm taught us all a valuable lesson," she continued. "They thought progress only moved in one direction, always forward, always more advanced. They forgot that sometimes you need to step back to move forward." The tour reached the memorial hall, where Krithak's name shone alongside thousands of others. Sarah paused, letting the students absorb the gravity of what they were seeing. "The war changed more than just our technology," she said quietly. "It changed how we think about progress itself. The Concordat learned that newer isn't always better. Humanity learned that we don't have to abandon advancement to keep what works. Together, we found a balance." In the years since the war, that balance had reshaped galactic civilization. The Concordat's rigid technological hierarchy gave way to a more nuanced approach. Every ship now carried both quantum computers and mechanical backups. Engineers studied ancient techniques alongside cutting-edge theories. The term primitive fell out of diplomatic language, replaced by discussions of effectiveness and adaptability. "Admiral," Lieutenant Park's voice, now Captain Park, called from the doorway. "The celebration ceremony is about to begin." Sarah nodded. Today marked the official opening of the new Earth Academy of Hybrid Technologies, where students from across the galaxy would learn to combine old and new, simple and advanced, in ways that would have seemed impossible before the war. The ceremony was held in orbit, with ships of all designs gathered to mark the occasion. The Eclipse, now serving as both museum and training vessel, held position at the center of the formation. Sarah took her place at the podium, looking out at faces both familiar and strange. 5 years ago, we faced an enemy that believed technological superiority was everything, she began. They nearly won. Not because they were more advanced, but because we had forgotten something important. True strength doesn't come from abandoning our past, but from learning to use everything at our disposal. She gestured to the fleet around them, a living testament to that philosophy. Look at our ships now. Human vessels with crystalline cores, Concordat ships with mechanical backups, new designs that would have seemed impossible a decade ago. We're not just surviving, we're thriving, because we finally understood that progress isn't a straight line. The applause that followed came through both quantum channels and old-fashioned radio waves. Sarah smiled, remembering Krithak's last words. Primitives, together, strong. But they weren't primitives anymore. They were something new, a civilization that had learned to embrace all of its history, all of its technology, all of its potential. Later, in the quiet of her quarters aboard the Eclipse, Sarah looked at the original Primitive Fleet designation in its frame on her wall. Below it sat her new rank insignia, Admiral of the Combined Fleet, a position that hadn't existed before the war. A message notification blinked on her desk, both on the quantum display and the backup mechanical screen. It was from the Academy. The first class of hybrid technology students was ready to begin their training. Humans would teach Concordat engineers about mechanical redundancy. Crystalline instructors would share quantum theories with eager human students, and together they would forge something new. Sarah touched Krithak's name on her memorial display one last time before heading to meet the future. They had started this journey as primitives and advanced civilizations, as separate species with separate paths. They had ended it as something else entirely, a civilization that understood that true progress meant learning from everything, old and new, simple and complex, primitive and advanced. The stars beckoned, and humanity's primitive fleet had become legend, not for proving its superiority, but for teaching the galaxy that there was no such thing as primitive, not when you had the wisdom to learn from every step of your journey.